secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and the political commentator Benedict Spence. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Telegraph leads with the exclusive Sky News interview with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, saying that he could give up territory to Russia in the short term in exchange for the protection of NATO. After that historic Commons vote, the Eye leads with news that assisted dying is set to become legal in the UK within 3 years. Same lead story in The Guardian, which pictures pro-assisted dying campaigners outside Parliament celebrating the vote. But the Mirror points out that there also sorrow amongst those opposed to the bill. The Express, which has been campaigning for the change in support of Dame Esther Ranson, says future generations will now be spared the ordeal of a painful death like many have suffered. The Mail says that by voting to move the bill forward to the next stage, they've taken what it calls a leap into the unknown. The Times says the Prime Minister and Chancellor both voted for the bill, but that ministers have now been told to stay neutral while the exact details are worked out. The Financial Times leads with news that a flurry of takeover offers in the past week has boosted UK financial markets, underlining Britain's reputation as the place for mergers and acquisitions. And finally, in this Star, Ulrika Johnson criticises MasterChef host Greg Wallace over some of the sexually inappropriate comments he's alleged to have made. He's denied wrongdoing, but stepped back from the show pending investigation. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Zoe Williams and Benedict Spence. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Daily Telegraph and front page, our exclusive, the interview that Stuart Ramsey did with President Zelensky, and does seemingly have found a shift, or at least Zelensky is moving in terms of talking about peace and conceding land, even though perhaps temporarily, but for membership of NATO, and this is something we've not heard before.
It's absolutely extraordinary, and extraordinary, by the way, to get that as an exclusive in a TV interview when he's never said it before. But it is still quite complicated. So he's saying that he would agree to a peace with the land that he's currently got, on the understanding that he could negotiate back the land that the Russians have taken. I think there are 4 areas plus Crimea, in return for a NATO umbrella. But it's confusing what NATO umbrella means. It doesn't mean membership of NATO. It means security assurances from other NATO members. And he was asked, Stuart Ramsey asked him, if you could get full membership, would you agree to the territory as it stands at the moment? And he said, well, that's not on the table. But that's not a no, is it? So, it's kind of possible that if a stronger NATO membership were offered, then the territorial concerns would themselves change. And that's pretty massive, because it's certainly Russia would violently oppose Ukraine's membership of NATO. But it throws all the cards up in the air.
Certainly does.
Yeah, I don't actually think it's so unexpected. I think this is something that's been pushed behind the scenes for some time, as it's become more and more clear that Ukraine is not going to win the war.
Pushed by who?
By the United States, ultimately. This is what it all boils down to, which is that there were going to have to be territorial concessions, partly because much of the rest of the world outside of the West already effectively recognises Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea and Mariupol as part of Russia. They don't enforce sanctions on on the politicians involved there. They do trade with them. This is becoming very much accepted everywhere from sort of Iran to China, that this is the way of the world, that this is how it's going to be going forward. And Donald Trump winning the US presidential election, I think, has solidified that. A plan that has been circulating inside the White House, well, the future White House, has been that actually that it would effectively be where the current borders are, would be the new lines that have been drawn. Under this proposal, what I sort of interpret Zelensky as saying, he would be able to save face by effectively saying, OK, hypothetically, let's say Crimea is now Russian, but we refuse to concede territorial claims on Mariupol and the Donbass. But the United States might not say that. It might say, OK, we will recognise that as territory. Ukraine doesn't have to, but this is where we'll go from here. The question would be, actually, at this moment, is why would Russia accept that? Because this being floated by Ukraine is Zelensky effectively saying, I've lost this war. The Russians will say, well, this is where the border is now anyway. Why should we have to concede on this? Actually, we are, through the process of attrition, we are gaining ground, we are grinding you down. And actually, what have you got to offer us that the rest of the world doesn't already deal with us on? And this is difficult because I want Ukraine to win this war. I think most people in the West would quite like Ukraine to be a sovereign and independent nation and get its territory back. But also, why would Russia accept, given the current circumstances, a NATO umbrella? Why would it accept NATO troops going into Ukraine? Because at that point it would say, well, then they're never coming out again. They're not currently there and you're not prepared to put them in there because you're scared. So why would we agree, effectively, to allow NATO in via the back door? What they might be prepared to accept would be membership of the European Union. But I don't think the European Union would accept that. So I think Ukraine finds itself in a very difficult position where it would love to be under the NATO umbrella, absolutely. But I'm really not sure that's what most NATO countries want, and I don't think Russia would accept it, even if Ukraine said, you can keep Crimea and we'll talk about these other places.
But then we're at an impasse again, though, aren't we? Because Ukraine is saying that they want this NATO umbrella before they even talk about ceasefire.
And also, I don't understand what you think Russia would be objecting to there, because it's ultimately not up to a NATO umbrella is not the same as NATO membership, and it certainly isn't the same as having NATO forces anywhere in any of those regions.
Russia would say that it is a gateway to that, and I
It
suspect.
might well do, but,
well, this is the thing. Well, yes, it would say that. It would say that, and we can say, well, it might well do. But we're already not prepared to talk about putting NATO troops on the ground right now because of what that would potentially mean. So if Russia is just going to say flat out no, what are we going to do? We're going to put NATO troops in there to go, OK, we're going to try and call your bluff. We've not been prepared to do that up to now.
I just think you're sort of. I can't. It's not.
Too cynical?
It's not shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted, but there's something about shutting the door at an inappropriate time, in the sense that just saying that they want a NATO umbrella is not the same as saying we want NATO troops in there, and Putin saying I think it's a gateway to that. I mean, Vladimir Putin is not an honest broker. He could say anything. He often does say.
No, it's not.
He's still claiming that Ukraine is overrun with Nazis, and that's why they had to go in the first place.
Right.
So I don't think we need to really look at Putin as a kind of rational, honest agent who will rationally and honestly object.
OK, so what would a NATO umbrella be in that situation?
Well, I mean,
a no-fly zone?
Exactly that. Well, that's exactly the point.
Well, that means if Russian troops go in there, that means NATO has to respond. It is the same thing.
A NATO umbrella would be against further incursion, right? It wouldn't be just NATO needs to police these borders as they stand at the moment, because that would never be the deal.
To which the Russians would say, we're not going to accept that, because by definition, if we step foot over the line, NATO would have to be drawn into that conflict. That's what I'm trying to get at.
But if you're saying Putin won't accept anything that doesn't leave him open to invade again, then of course he's never going to accept anything, because any peace treaty is going to necessitate Putin undertaking not to invade again.
Of course, he wants to invade. That's the point. That's what he wants.
You're just saying there is no possibility of peace until Russia has invaded all of Ukraine.
Unless you defeat them militarily, but we have to move on.
Well, we've just got a few more seconds. We might as well finish off on this. I was just going to ask about the possibility of how this could all end, and whether you see what Zelensky has now told us as a positive, as a step towards peace.
I mean, I think that some responsibility has to be undertaken towards Ukraine, which is more than just they're the good guys, I want them to win. They are, without question, standing between Russia and any aggression towards other European countries. And we see this in the public service announcements in Germany, in Norway, in Finland, in Sweden. They're telling their citizens to get ready for war, you know, especially in the northern states and across Europe. People are really, really worried about Putin's intentions, and Ukraine has been single-handedly holding them off since 2022. So I think the idea that we just say, oh, well, nice try, Zelensky, but it didn't work out for you this time, is if we're just waiting for it to come to somebody else's doorstep.
What would be required would be a reaugmentation of how Europe views its own defensive autonomy. It would mean moving away from the current model, which is to be very much reliant on the US military and also US companies to procure equipment and weapons from, and it would mean a massive uptick in the budgets allocated to send this equipment to the Ukrainians. That is what would be required, because right now Europe doesn't seem particularly keen on that, and it is waiting basically for sign-offs from Congress, which it had real trouble with last time, and it's just not going to get under a Republican Congress. That is basically the only way I see Ukraine being able to keep the fight going, is if Europe goes, OK, this is our fight, we can't put troops on the ground, but we can send much more weapons, and we need to ramp up production of those. OK,
Benedict and Zoe, thank you very much for the moment. We are going to take a break. Coming up, much more from the papers. We'll be starting with The Guardian. Their headline, Historic Vote Paves the Way for Assisted Dying. We'll be discussing today's events when we come back.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters. We love Trump! I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor, free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
us that they want aid. And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Zoe Williams and Benedict Spence. Let's start with The Guardian and the historic assisted dying vote today. I don't know if you managed to watch much of
I did see the
Zoe.
debates, and I did think it was, you know, a lot of people have said it was the House of Commons at its best, and people did seem to be speaking passionately and respectfully to one another. I mean, the notion that you have these votes of conscience where you don't get whipped by your leader because the matter is life and death, and therefore you can't be told, you know, it would be against morality for you to defer to your party line. I still don't really understand why, in a matter of such consequence and such gravity, the country as a whole and where it is, doesn't get a look in. You know, that's the point of representative democracy, is that you represent your constituents at the level of the legislature. And 70% of people have been in favour of assisted dying since absolutely forever. I mean, that's been true for a really long time. So that seems to have fed its way into the House of Commons, but it looked really, really squeaky for a long time. I mean, just as a colleague was putting together a spreadsheet about 8 days ago and only had about a third of MPs, but she had 112 on yes and 106 on no. So it looked much, much closer than it turned out to be. And this has been pretty resounding, although it will have it's got a lot more phases to go through.
And it's interesting what Zoe's saying about not having to follow the party whip on this particular vote of conscience, because the Times is saying that ministers have now been told to stay neutral while the details are worked out.
I think that's very tricky, given that perhaps the two government ministers who are going to be most affected by this both came out and said, guys, this is a really bad idea. The legislation in its current form is going to be bad. Shabana Mahmood, the Chancellor, the Justice Secretary, and Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, both said that they would be voting against it, and both said that basically the departments that they overrun are not currently fit to handle this, which was interesting because that's something that Jess Phillips said as well. She would be voting for it even though the NHS couldn't do it, at which point you kind of sat there thinking, well, what's the point in that? It doesn't sound like a particularly sensible thing to do. I think there have been a lot of interventions throughout this, as Zoe says, from sort of across the House. And whilst it is true that a majority of people are in favour of this, the main criticisms of this legislation is not that it is moral bad or moral negative. It is that the legislation itself does not have the safeguards in place for them to feel comfortable about it. And actually, I think if you do go through this, and I think the fact that it was so narrow in the end reflects that, it would only be, it was what, a difference of 55? So you'd only need to 55. Sway, what, 22, 23 MPs for that to change at the second reading. And I think when you have sort of very experienced old hands, both the father and mother of the House, you had Diane Abbott opposed to this, Jeremy Corbyn opposed to this, and you had people like Danny Kruger opposed to this. You have a real breadth of people all saying, take the morality out of this situation. The safeguards are not in this legislation, and that's why it should be opposed.
We've just got a few seconds to talk about Notre Dame, the restoration in Paris, on the front page of the FT. Look at that crowd there. Restored to its prior glory.
Many of them were... So these are all the workers who worked on it and did so in record time. You know, it is 5 years, but that's not very... You know, Cologne Cathedral took 800 years to build the first time. So
hardly believe it's
5 years. I know, it's extreme. It's amazingly fast.
Zoe.
And a lot of them didn't want to stop.
And Benedict, thank you very much. Much more from you in the next hour. Let's take a look at the weather for you now. Well, the weekend will be very mild, but wet at times. Luckily, the rain bands will be more showery in nature and move through fairly quickly. It'll be a mostly cloudy but mild start on Saturday, although eastern areas will be a little bit cooler. Overnight, rain will have eased to leave a few spots of rain and drizzle. Overall, it's set to be a cloudy and breezy day with occasional rain and drizzle in the north and west. But there will be a few brighter breaks, and it's much milder for all. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, a Sky News exclusive. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky speaks to our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, and says he's prepared to give up parts of Ukraine.
we arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.